What's going on, everybody? I am back. the Club and Sub podcast, episode number 196. This week, talking UFC Vegas 99. Tonight, going to be doing a solo show. Just going to run through the card pretty quickly. I have a lot going on. Lags was kept at work late tonight, so he's not going to be able to do it. This week's been all over the place, but we should be back to our regularly scheduled programming as of next week. Real quick, guys, if you like the show, drop a like, subscribe. I say it every week. It would really help us out. If you want to make some money, go to fightnumbers.com. Use the promo code CLUB, CLUB, for 30% off your first month subscription there. Fight Numbers, they got the DFS projections from John Kelly. They got the live odds screen. They got bets from Pepe and Ozzy, the two really sharp guys there. And they got the trend calculator there. Pretty interesting. You can look up some trends, whether you can find anything interesting, TBD. But you can help you find out whether or not some of the things you've been following are signal or noise. So yeah, check it out. Fightnumbers.com, promo code CLUB. Last week's card, I did pretty well. I mean, on the bets that I made before the card, I think I finished down like 2.2 units. I actually arbed off some of my Carpenter, which I wish I hadn't, about half of it. So that cashed for about 2 units. That was pretty straightforward. I had a unit and a half on Dan Argueta. Kind of kicking myself for that one because I was pretty adamant about staying off it. And the more I thought about it as the week went on, I ended up just taking the bite in the bullet and diving in at the last second. Corey McKenna, I had 2.5 units on her, plus 121. Not a great bet, but I don't think an awful bet either. I mean, the truth of the matter is, you saw on the last takedown of that fight that she was going to hold Pereira down if she got a takedown. If McKenna gets an early takedown in round 1 or round 2, she wins the fight. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, Pereira was a bit too physical for her, but I don't think it was an unwinnable fight for McKenna by any means. And then, I ended up right a post. I posted the ticket last week, but I bet Brandon Royval about plus 270, right a post there. And the fight went, I don't want to say it went like I expected it to go. I wasn't really sure, but I had conviction in Royval because, you just look at the guy and all he does is produce offense. Nothing looks good when he's fighting, but I mean, the guy got taken down by Alexandra Pantoja 8 times and gave up 16 minutes of control and still landed 285 total strikes and 111 significant strikes. And my view was Tyro was going to have to demonstrate like absolutely elite cardio. And even with that, he was going to probably deal with a lot of Royval volume unless he finished him. And that's kind of how it played out. It was a close fight, though. Honestly, Tyra's a stud. I was actually impressed with him in a loss. Dude kept coming even in round 5, even after nearly being finished in the 3rd round. But yeah, decent card last week. This weekend's card, pretty good one, or decent one. I actually am going to be in attendance, though. Pretty excited about it. Getting on a flight to Vegas tomorrow morning. Going to go to one of the last Apex shows they're doing. So pumped about that. I've made one official bet so far. I have a bunch that I'm probably going to end up making. But I'm just monitoring line movement. So yeah, let's just dive right in. UFC Vegas 99, Pereira, Hernandez. We have got first fight of the night. Robelis Despain taking on Austin Lane. Current price, Despain minus 340. Come back on Lane plus 165. The obvious question here is just like, is Lane going to get him down early in this fight, right? And I'm not really sure. The thing is, I don't think Lane has the cardio to fight for 15 minutes in the way Waldo Cortez Acosta did in his last fight. I also think, when you watch that fight back, Acosta was willing to eat a bunch of shots to get in close and hit those reactive takedowns. I don't think Lane can tank the shots that Acosta did. But with that said, if Lane does get to top position early in this fight, I think Lane's a lot nastier on top than Acosta, both from a ground and pound, advancing position, and submission perspective. So, if Lane gets an early takedown here, I think he's pretty live to finish the fight right there. But if he doesn't, I would expect him to slow down like we saw in the Denise fight and possibly get killed in round 2. I'm kind of torn because on the one hand, it's like that hole in Robelis Despain's grappling is just gigantic. You can't really unsee it, once you've seen it, which was kind of my suspicion going into that fight. But I bet Waldo because I thought he had durability and cardio to push him, not because I thought he was going to come out and put on 11 minutes of top time, which is what he did. So, I mean, there's obviously a case to bet Lane here. I've considered it. I am considering it. But I do just think Lane is like a complete bot on the feet. And he's the kind of guy, he's not going to shell up and try to get in tight. When he comes in, his hands are down, his chin's there to be cracked. And, Robelis, for all his flaws, he does hit very, very hard. And Lane is pretty fragile. So as of now, I'm passing. I'll see what the line does. But Yeah, I mean, Lane could win this fight. The path is there. We all know the path is there. The question is just how often does he execute that path? One, how often while executing it does he finish? Two, because if he doesn't execute and finish early, I kind of think he's going to gas out. And I'll say this for Robellis, I think his cardio is bad, but the dude was still throwing fucking heat in round 3 against Acosta, whereas Lane, after one round of top control against Denise, looked like he was suffering cardiac arrest. So yeah, I think Lane's margins are pretty front loaded here, but I think they're there. So pass for me though. Moving on, we got Melly Martinez. She's taken on Alice Ardelaine or Ardelian. I don't know how you pronounce it. Melly currently minus 123 to come back on Ardelian plus 103. I will eventually take a shot on Melissa Martinez here, to be honest. I don't really understand the money that's been coming in on Ardeline this week. This woman was just plus 200 against Shauna Bannon. I think the common refrain to that would be, or response to that would be, oh, she went to a split with her. You could have argued she won that fight. But first of all, I don't think that should have been a split. I mean, basically, Elyan's entire fight there was 7 minutes of top time where she didn't really do much damage, if we're being honest. You know, even the first round, she had about 3.5 minutes of control, and she spent the entire time fighting submissions. You know, it wasn't like she was doing much effective grappling. And I also think that fight is leading people to believe that Ardellion's a grappler by trade, and she's really not. You know, when you watch her past fights, this is a woman who wants to strike most of the time. She's not someone throwing strikes out there to set up entries to the legs. She's never really attacking the legs. The times Ardelion goes for takedowns are really when women kind of tie her up in the clinch, which is what happened with Bannon both times she got taken down. Bannon went blitzing forward at her, ended up tied up in the clinch, and she kind of just put her down after Bannon tried to lat drop her, or not lat drop her, but kind of like whizzer kick her. So I think the price implying that, you know, Ardelion is this very proactive grappler is just, number one, incorrect. Number two, I think it's pricing that because of the last 2 fights from Melissa Martinez. Obviously, round 3 in that last fight, we saw her get taken down 3 times by Elise Reed with a body lock. And the fight prior to that, you know, she went to a split decision with Desiree Yanez, and that entire fight was grappling. Yanez obviously had a fair amount of success with it. The thing is, first of all, in the Reed fight, yeah, she got taken down a few times at the end of the fight and lost, but she kept getting up. And then I look at the Yanez fight, and it's like Desiree Yanez pushed a hellacious pace in that fight. Yanez did get some control on top in round 2 in that fight when she got her flattened out in the middle of the cage, or flat on her back in the middle of the cage, not flattened out, excuse me. But most of that fight, whenever she get a takedown, Melly was popping back up. She digs unders pretty well. I don't, based on the cardio performance we saw from Ardelian in her last fight, I'm pretty skeptical that this woman, with the amount of weight she cuts too, is going to be able to push anything near the pace that Yanez pushed against Martinez. And if she can't do that, I just think Melly's a much better striker. You know, she picks her shots much better. She's much higher volume. Ardellion's got some power. I'll give her credit. But she is, you know, one shot at a time. Daniel says, am I worried about Martinez time off? To a degree. I mean, she obviously had 1 year of training, but then she tore her ACL and PCL. So that's obviously a concern. But she's young and, in my opinion, the superior talent here. I mean, look, am I going to be surprised if she gets top time to a loss? No, because I think that's the path for Ardelion. But I also kind of feel like it's one of these fights where Ardelion could get 5 or 6 minutes of control and still lose a pretty convincing decision just because she gets badly outboxed. Whereas if Ardelion doesn't get 5 to 6 minutes of control, I think she's going to get beaten up pretty badly. So I think Ardelion could lose like one of the best iterations of this fight for her, and I think she'd have a hard time winning it if she doesn't get her perfect fight. So I think Martinez should be in like the minus 160, minus 170 range personally. I will probably take a shot at her. Moving on, third fight of the night, we got Jessica Penne taking on Elise Reed. Not a ton of thoughts from me here. I think I don't want to say Reed's the side. I don't think there is a side. I think Reed's going to win the fight, though. I think the line is fine. Obviously, Elise Reed gaping bottom hole. That's probably why she's not minus 300 in this fight. When she's grounded, she doesn't really have much there. But Penne is a pretty bad wrestler. Almost never gets more than 1 takedown throughout her career. At 42 or 41, almost 42, it's hard to project her. For me, it's hard to project Penne to get more than 0 to 1 takedowns. And so with that dynamic, it's like, yeah, 1 takedown, maybe around could be the fight. I don't think it's that high percentage, though, that she finishes the fight off 1 takedown. And on the feet, I think the gap is night and day. You know, Reed is a very average UFC fighter, but she's got good stand-up. She hits hard. She's very fast, decent kicks. I shouldn't say, I mean, she's not a well-rounded kickboxer, but she's got a good right hand and she has good kicks. And Penne really doesn't, on top of which Penne is old and has been off for a while. I understand why you might want to take the shot on Penne with the grappling upside. I just kind of think she's obviously past it, fighting a younger, much faster fighter who's a much better striker. So I think Reed is the obvious side in this fight. Moving on, we got Jocelyn Edwards taking on Tamiris Vidal. Current price, Edwards minus 236. Comeback on Vidal plus 201. It's funny because I taped Vidal first and was like, man, I might lay minus 200 on Jocelyn Edwards. And then I taped Jocelyn Edwards. It's like, yep, I can't do that. Jocelyn Edwards should have a lot of advantages in this fight. I think she's the more skilled fighter in the aggregate. Throws better volume, a bit more technical, probably the better grappler of the two. Vidal, I don't really like her game at all. She's got some power, but she's slow, throws big winging stuff. The best thing she does is leg kicks, I guess, but that's kind of it. The thing is, I don't see much finishing upside for Edwards. I think the best iteration of an Ed fight for Edwards here would be a bunch of takedowns and top time, but I don't think she's a great wrestler, and I think Vidal is probably stronger than her. So I don't think that will come very easily. I mean, I still favor Edwards, obviously. Like, I'm not betting Vidal, but I do think you have a woman in Edwards who is quite harmless, with her strikes. She throws a lot of them, but then you have a woman with Vidal who's a bit more low volume, but who throws pretty heavy. And it's not very hard for me to imagine this being something like the Cornoli fight where, Vidal lands a couple really hard shots that have an impact, and it's enough to swing rounds. I mean, Edwards has been in 3 split decisions in her last 4. She just fights close, and I don't think her wrestling is rely enough to lay minus 200 on her, to be honest. So, yeah, I think Edwards will win. I think it's going to be a sweaty fight, though, to be it. Moving on, though, Brad Katona, John Matsumoto. I bet Brad Katona last night at plus 200 for a unit. I think Matsumoto is a pretty good talent. Decent kickboxer, pretty high volume, good calf kicks. Showed off in his last fight that he's a decent, I don't want to say counter wrestler, but he's got a decent get-up game. Maybe not the best takedown defense, but he can get up. You're probably not going to hold him there. I think he's an intriguing prospect, Matsumoto. He looks like he's a young kid who's getting better, who does a lot of good things. What I think Matsumoto lacks, though, is really any kind of stopping power. Like, he doesn't hit very hard as far as I can tell. I don't think he's a great grappler himself, even though he won his last fight by sub. And so I think he's still probably coming into his frame, and maybe that all builds out. But while he's high volume, which I love, and has good cardio, which I love, if you don't have any stopping power and you're not a great grappler, that can only take you so far. And he's getting a guy in Brad Katona who's a much more tested fighter. He's fought a much better level of competition. Like, Brad Katona is not great, but he's like a firmly average UFC fighter. And Brad Katona is high volume himself. He landed 160 significant strikes against Cody Gibson 2 fights ago. He'll push a pace, and Brad Katona will mix it up. He'll push the grappling. He'll push you into the clinch. Daniel's saying, do I think GTD is a lock? I don't want to ever call it a lock, but I actually think there probably is value on the minus 300 GTD. I actually looked at it. I just think it's nauseating to kind of lay that price. I think it goes the distance, like 80 to 85% probably. But I look at the fight, and I just feel like it's going to play close. Matsumoto, he finished Argueta in his last fight, but the fight before that, Casey Tanner scrapped with him pretty hard. And I don't know that Casey Tanner's a UFC level fighter, but he was pretty competitive in the stand-up, especially down the stretch. I saw that happen in a couple of his LFA fights too. And it's like, if he's fighting close with these guys, surely Brad Katona can fight close. And I think there's some upside here for Katona maybe getting some clinch control or 1 or 2 takedowns. I don't think he's going to do much with those takedowns, but in a fight that's going to be very high volume and play pretty close, a takedown or 2 or some clinch control can make a big difference on the scorecards. So I lead Matsumoto because I do think he's more talented than Katona, and I think he's a better athlete. But I think it's going to play close, and I think it's hard to make him pass like minus 125 here. So, yeah, I have a small bet on the Brad Katona side. Moving on, Mateus Nicolau taking on Asu Amabayev. Current price, Amabayev minus 200. The comeback on Nicolau, plus 170. I will probably bet Nicolau here. It makes me a bit uncomfortable because I haven't had too much success in finding much work of Nicolau off his back, and there's some good stuff in there, and there's some stuff that really scares me in there. And obviously, Asu, highly touted prospect, very, very proactive wrestler, goes for it hard every fight. But I wasn't very high on Asu coming into the UFC because I don't think he's got a lot of power behind his wrestling. And he's impressed me a bit in his first 3 fights, to be fair to him, with how relentless he's been with it. But I mean, then you look at the guys he's fighting, and I mean, CJ Vergara is one of the worst grapplers at flyweight. Ode Osborne's one of the worst defensive grapplers at flyweight. Jose Johnson's one of the worst defensive grapplers at flyweight. He's being hand-giving guys. And if you go back before that, his last fight before the UFC, it's like he basically robbed Zach Makovsky, who's, once upon a time, Zach Makovsky was a solid UFC fighter. But Zach Makovsky's a 40-year-old man who was completely past it, and they were basically 50-50 in that fight. And I thought Makovsky won it. And so I have some concerns about the Nicolau playing guard, but I keep thinking about it, and it's like I have to project Nicolau to do a lot better defensively grappling than Jose Johnson or CJ Vergara or Ode Osborne did against Almabayev. On top of which, Almabayev's lost position a few times. Like you saw Jose Johnson mount him twice. And Nicolau is a much more threatening grappler in top position than those guys. He's a pretty good black belt. He's a dangerous submission grappler. And then, what if he just struggles to take him down, which I think could happen. I think there's a large standing edge for Nicolau here. Obviously, you worry about his chinniness, but Asu is low volume himself. I don't think he packs a lot of stopping power. And, if he tries to put it on Nicolau on the feet, I think Nicolau's going to find a home for his counters a lot. And I think he hits a lot harder than Asu does. So I don't know. I think you can favor Asu in this fight off of process. And he's got obviously some upside, but I think making him minus 200, he was minus 140 or minus 150 against Ode Osborne. How is he minus 200 against Matheus Nicolau? I don't think it makes terribly much sense. These guys have just been fighting a different class of opponents. And Asu, when he's taken steps up throughout his career, hasn't really looked great. So, yeah, I'll probably enter on Nicolau. I'm not going to go big because I do think, if it turns out Asu is legit, I think he could cover this price. But I don't know. I'm pretty skeptical, and I'm pretty skeptical it's going to be easy to ragdoll a black belt like Nicolau. So, yeah, I'll end up on the Matheus side of things. Moving on, Darren Elkins taking on Daniel Pineda. Current price, Elkins minus 115. The comeback on Pineda minus 105. I took a little bit of Elkins plus 105 last night on Forecasters. I don't know if I'll hold it or not. I may just trade it into Elkins 2-3 and maybe even under and Pineda round 1. I do think this is a pretty good fight for Darren Elkins in the aggregate, but Daniel Pineda, while he's fresh, the man is a hoss. Throws fast, good athlete, a lot of power. I think he can hurt Elkins on the feet early in this fight, possibly even finish him. I just don't think it's super high percentage, but I think both guys can get takedowns while they're fresh in this fight. I think while I'm looking at it, I think Elkins is the more likely of the two to keep scrambles going, though. I think Pineda can when he's fresh, but I think once, the first 3 or 4 minutes clear, he's going to have a lot of trouble keeping Elkins' pace. And I think once that happens, Elkins is just going to probably pump him the entire back end of this fight. He's just got much, much better cardio, much more tenacity than Pineda. Pineda has shown his way out of some fights in the past. So I do think you have to make Elkins minus 150 here. I just feel like maybe I won't hold the pre-bet just because, if Pineda's going to win the fight, it's probably most of his equity is going to be front-loaded in the first round here, and I don't know if I want to steer into that. But I'll say this. I saw an interview with Pineda today where the guy was talking about how if he loses this fight, he's retiring. He hasn't been able to train with anybody this camp because he's been injured. All he's been able to do is run. It sounds pretty bearish, and it sounded a lot like a guy who's coming to take a check. Whereas, look, Darren Elkins is probably at the end of the rainbow too now, but we know what we're getting with Darren Elkins. The guy's a dog. He's a lunch pail, bring your lunch pail to work type of guy. Blue collar fighter. He's going to come out there. He's going to give it his all every fight. He's going to be in shape. So I like Elkins' attributes a lot more in this kind of fight. I lead him to win. I kind of like the 2-3 stuff on him a little bit. And, maybe take a little bit of Pineda round 1 just to cover yourself. Moving on, we have Cameron Smotherman taking on Jake Hadley. Bit of a bummer because I actually had what I thought was going to be a decent contrarian take in the Hadley-Heastand fight, but obviously that didn't come to fruition. And so now we have Jake Hadley taking on Cameron Smotherman. Couple things. Obviously, this fight's very short notice for Smotherman. He was apparently in Saudi Arabia, ready to corner Raufeon Stotts when he got the news, and is currently on a flight back to Vegas, which seems pretty bearish mid-weight cut. So right away, we're starting off in not a great place. Obviously, he's taking a big step up in competition here. If these guys stayed standing for 15 and all things were equal, I think Smotherman might be able to compete a bit. He's got decent volume. He's a decent boxer, okay power. Hadley's crisper, though. He's faster, and I think he hits a bit harder than Smotherman does. So I would still favor Hadley there. But when you factor in all the macro stuff, I think you have to project Hadley to win the stand-up fairly clean. And then, man, when you look at Smotherman's grappling, it is just, or Hadley's grappling versus Smotherman's, Hadley's just on a different level than he is. Smotherman's got okay takedown defense. I wouldn't be shocked if he was able to keep this mostly standing. But once the guy gets grounded, there's just nothing there. Just doesn't know how to stop guys from passing, doesn't really know how to work up. I think if Hadley gets on top of him here, he could really do work and probably sub him. I wouldn't mind. I'm hoping maybe like domestics give us like a plus 500, plus 600 Hadley subline. Probably won't happen, but I do think if Hadley gets on top, he's going to absolutely own him. Ultimately, the fight seems straightforward. The minus 450 deserves to be a big favorite. I think he's probably going to take care of business here. Moving on, we have got Sue Mudaerji taking on Charles Johnson. I actually talked about this fight on the UFC Fight Pass show yesterday, but I like Sue, and I'll eventually bet Sue here. And the thing is, I bet Charles in his last 4 fights. Lost one of them, won the other 3. He was a dog in all of them. Now Charles is a minus 225 favorite for, he was a big favorite against Flick, so I guess that he was a huge favorite there. But it's the biggest price he's been since Jimmy Flick. And I think what is being priced into this line is both the combination of this big winning streak Charles is on, combined with Sue showing really very little competency in the grappling and losing 2 fights in a row to Matt Schnell and Tim Elliott. But I think the grappling aspect of this fight's being overly priced in. Charles Johnson, he's fought bad grapplers before and hasn't really exposed them on the mat. The guy fought Ode Osborne. He actually gave up more takedowns to Ode than he got, and he gave up more control time to Ode in that fight. Ode is one of the worst guys on bottom in the UFC. He fought Josh Van in his last fight. Now, he won that fight. It was a great fight. He fought very well. But theoretically, Josh Van's biggest, or not even theoretically, Josh Van's biggest weakness is defensive wrestling and jiu-jitsu. And he did not even, he tried 2 kind of half-hearted takedowns, and that was it. He was content to strike with him. And now this line's basically saying he's going to come out here and grapple fuck Sue. Well, I don't really see any reason to think that's true on the one hand. Maybe he'll attempt 4 or 5 takedowns. I think he's going to have a hard time getting them, though, because Sue's got very good first-level takedown defense. And even if he gets him down, Sue was able to work out of some positions with Schnell early in that fight before he got hurt. And, yeah, Tim Elliott is just a different kind of animal than Charles Johnson is on top. We've seen nothing to suggest Charles Johnson's going to come in here, take him down, advance positions, and insta-arm triangle him, I just feel like that's being overpriced. And then when you think about it in the stand-up, I think Sue is the cleaner striker at distance. He's got better hands, in my opinion, much better hands. Like Sue, my biggest concern with Sue is his knees just seem like they're dust. Like the guy's got bad legs, and that might just inhibit him from becoming what he could be. But he's got really fast hands. He's as tall as Johnson is. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he's a little bit longer than Charles is. So, I think Charles' volume is more reliable, but no one has been able to get volume off against Sue in the UFC. The dude's striking metrics are off the charts. And I think Sue hits harder. With that said, I do think Charles Johnson is more durable than Sue is. I think Sue can be hurt, and it wouldn't shock me if Charles did. But still, if I don't project Charles to come out here and dominate in the grappling and route to a finish, who has Charles Johnson looked minus 200 against in the UFC? I love Charles Johnson. Dude seems like an awesome dude. I've bet him a ton. But, dude went 50-50 with Zhalgas Zhumagulov. Arguably lost that fight. Zhalgas isn't in the UFC anymore. Lost to Ode Osborne by decision. Lost to Rafael Esteban. The guy has not looked a big favorite against anybody in the UFC. And so Sue is one of the better tactical strikers in the division. I don't really see how Charles can be minus 225. So, yeah, I get, people are riding the Charles momentum. But I think it's a good time to sell energy stocks here. I'm going to probably end up on Sue. We'll see where this line ends up. Co-main event of the evening. Rob Font, Tyler Phillips. Rob Font's my boy, but he is just done, honestly. And I shouldn't even say I think. I love the under in this fight. I'm going to bet it probably shortly because it looks like it's starting to get bet. I don't see why. I know why this is favored to go the distance because Rob has only been finished once in his career. But I think Rob is massively under-indexed on being finished in recent times. Yeah, Tristan just said it, 37 at bantamweights rough. On top of which, it's like his last 3 losses, or 3 of his last 4 losses, he was badly hurt like 8 times in those fights. That's not a reliable way to go about continuing to fight and not getting finished. Eventually, those finishes are going to start materializing. On top of which, you look at the performance against Sandhagen, which I actually think is the most concerning of the bunch. Rob always had an okay get-up game, and Sandhagen just absolutely shit on him on the mat. And now he's fighting a guy in Kyler Phillips who hits very hard, is very fast, is very, very dynamic. Definitely can hurt him on the feet, and if he wants to, can take this fight down. Phillips is better on top than Sandhagen is. He's got a serious black belt. So I think there's a lot of room for Phillips to finish this fight. And on the other side of that, Phillips, obviously the big red flag for Kyler Phillips throughout his career is Kyler Phillips has terrible cardio. And Rob Font, come hell or high water, is going to push a pace, even if it means death. So the way I look at it is Kyler can and probably will hurt Rob on the feet and can finish him there. He can finish him on the mat, or it'll extend and you'll have Rob Font pouring on volume and can maybe stop him. I think the under should be like pick 'em, frankly, in this fight. I like that. I'll probably also have a little bit of Kyler ITD at like plus 200. And I think I'm going to take small poke. I'm going to wait and see like what Rivers and a couple of those other domestics do. But I'm kind of interested in taking some very, very small pokes on Rob KO2 and Rob KO3, because I think if he's winning this fight, it's likely coming on the back of like a ton of volume and pressure and in a fight where he breaks Kyler. So I like I like under. I like Kyler to finish, and I like the small shots on the Rob side to finish the fight late. Main event: Fluffy Hernandez, Michelle Pereira. Current price: Fluffy minus 134. The comeback on Michelle plus 114. My initial read of the fight was Pereira. Before I kind of looked at it, I just kept thinking in my head, I'm like, Pereira's got really good first level takedown defense. He attacks the body a lot. Fluffy's pretty soft to the body. Pereira's trajectory is obviously aimed up. And it just seemed like it made sense. And then I went into the tape, man. And I haven't decided if I'll try to live bet Fluffy while I'm there. But I do think Fluffy has to be the side here at the price. Like, the thing is, all the things I said about Pereira, I think are accurate. He is dangerous to the body. He hits hard. He's got good movement, and he could hurt and finish Fluffy early. But you have to ask yourself, like, what is the likelihood that happens? Like 25%, maybe 30% tops that he's going to finish Fluffy in the first 8 minutes. And if he doesn't do that, is there any reason to think he's not going to gas out here? He gassed at a striking pace against Nico Price and against Santiago Ponzinibbio. Now, you could say that was a high striking pace, and that's true. But, Fluffy Hernandez, that's all he does is push a pace. So, like, I don't really see any reason to think Pereira's cardio has improved. I know he's been fighting very, very well recently, and I'm a fan of Michelle Pereira, especially in 3-round fights. But, look at his fights at middleweight. Ihor Potieria, Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, Andre Petrosky. None of these fights went more than a minute and 1 second. Prior to the Pons fight, which was a split, by the way, against Old Pons, he fought Andre Fiallo. This is a guy who is, he hasn't really fought the best competition, and he hasn't fought a real grappler. And now he's fighting Fluffy, who brings an absolutely insane pace, start to finish. Yeah, I think Pereira can finish him early in this fight. But honestly, and my boy Evan said this earlier in the week, and I agree with him about it completely, I think the under is a lot better than Pereira if you're so inclined to that side. Like minus 130 on the under 2.5. Like, what? I really, really struggle to see like what Pereira competing here on the back end past 2.5 rounds looks like. Maybe he can win the first 3 rounds and have big moments and survive to a decision. I guess that's possible. There's probably some long tail risk outcomes there, but it's very, very low percentage. I think the vast majority, probably like 85 or more percent of Pereira's win equity here is going to be in the first 2 rounds. So with that dynamic, I just think Fluffy's got to be like minus 170 to minus 200 in this fight. I haven't decided if I'll enter early because I think Michelle is going to give him real fits early in this fight. I don't think takedowns will come very easy, and I think if he tries to close distance recklessly, he could get countered hard, and I think he's going to have a hard time dealing with all the teeps and body shots that Michelle throws. So I lean Pereira, but I think it is or I should say I lean Pereira. I lean Fluffy. I think he's the side, but I do think it's going to be very hard for him early. So I don't know if I want to get involved with that but I might. I mean, minus 130 feels like a pretty generous price, to be honest. Uh, but yeah, I lean Hernandez. I lean under, honestly, because I think Hernandez, if he gets his game going, can finish inside of 2.5 anyway. Whereas and Pereira, like I said, I think most of his finishing equity is tied to the under in this fight. So, yeah, those are my thoughts anyway, guys. I know it was a quick show today. We didn't have Lags on here. We're going to start doing more guests coming up soon, too. Lags and I are going to start hosting them. I officially, I'll announce him, when he starts working for us, but I officially got someone to do production for us, do some graphics, do some cool shit. So yeah, things are going to pick up around here. We should be on iTunes soon. We should be on SoundCloud. But I appreciate all of you, and I appreciate you all coming out here at 5:45 on a Thursday. Good luck on your bets this weekend if you're tailing. If you're not, I still wish you luck. Hopefully we all make some money. Please drop a like, subscribe. We'd appreciate it. And take it easy, everybody. Peace.